In pattern drafting, the goal is to figure out how to take the object that you want to replicate out of a different material and think about how you can take that three-dimensional form and identify where you could cut it apart so that you can make pattern pieces that you could, once cut open, lay flat onto a surface so that you can then cut those out of a different material like paper or leather or fabric or metal or whatever it is that you would be cutting out those pattern pieces out of, in order to then reassemble them into the new form. So in this example here, I made a pattern of this little children's shoe and then reconstructed it out of paper. What you're looking for when you are pattern drafting is oftentimes, especially on the shoes that we'll be pattern drafting, are existing seam lines. So I can clearly see right here that there's a seam that follows this front piece all the way to the opposite side. And if I look away around to the front, I don't see any more seams, which to me indicates that this could be one pattern piece. And then if I look around to the side, I can see that this is one piece and this is another piece. But I also kind of realized it was probably fairly simple that I could just make this a continuous form and I could just make this into one pattern piece. So that's all I need for this shoe, is actually just two pieces for the top half of it. But then I also need to do the bottom of the shoe. So for the bottom of the shoe, I have a flat pattern piece for the base and then one that goes around the outer side. So these are all the separate pieces that I have. And you can see that I've also labeled them. So this one says front, and it's got little tick marks that will show me how these pattern pieces go together. So B and B, and this wraps around. So that's how that front half goes together. I have the base of the shoe, and then I have this little piece that snakes around to make the width of the shoe. This is a really nice, simple, basic pattern. And if you can find a way to get a shoe from your collection that maybe only has 4, maybe 5 pieces, that would be fantastic. But you can draft way more complex forms, as I'll show you in some of my other examples here. So I'll set these off to the side. This is a work boot that I have, and if I start looking and identifying all the different parts of this, there are quite a few. So it's just one for this front form that comes up to create this decorative element right up there. It's got that piece here, it's got a heel, it just has lots of different parts. And then the sole of the shoe is also going to be a little trickier to work with because it's got a little ridge here, and then it's got a whole bunch of texture on the bottom as well. You don't need to pattern draft each one of those little textural points. We could just make this flat, but this form would be much more complex to pattern draft, as you can see by the version that I did right here. So we make the pattern by actually just taping the form, and I'll show you that in another video. And then you can trace the existing seam lines, mark them up, and then cut them off. But I kind of got overwhelmed with this shoe, thinking, holy moly, that's a lot of parts. So, you know, you can pattern draft complex forms, but you might also want to think about simplifying this process, especially in the beginning. This boot would also be a really fun form to make a pattern of. One of the things to consider is if you are working with shoes that are leather or a slightly different material here, is that the leather can be stretched over a form to help create this little round toe box. And we'll be using paper, so our paper won't kind of have that flexibility. So if you do have a shoe that has a round toe box like this, you're probably going to have to do something a little bit different to create that shape. I can show you here on this boot, I kind of imagined that I was going to have to cut this little eyeball wedge shape out of the tip of the toe in order to create that rounded shape. I kind of imagined that this would lay flat and that this would lay flat when I cut it off. In the original shoe, this piece doesn't exist. It's just leather formed over something. I would, if you can, avoid trying to work with a tennis shoe unless it's a much more simple form. But for example, this studio shoe of mine has like rubber and stretchy material, and it's just a super complex form. It's not really made in the traditional way that you draft a pattern, and so I really have no idea how I would approach even working on this. I would have to essentially make up my own pattern and make up my own lines after taping it. So start looking through your shoe collection. Think about where you can easily identify shapes and forms. Count them up: 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not too bad. This one would probably be 1, 2, 3, 4. I do these little loops, so 5, and then the heel of this would be like 6, 7. So maybe possible, but this would certainly be a much quicker form to work with. Okay, so find a shoe that you think would work good, and then you can watch the next video for how to tape up the pattern.